welcome to the Space Policy Show. In today's episode number 92, Space, Safe, Secure, and Sustainable, we are pleased to host Dr. Angie Bukley from the Center for Space Policy and Strategy at Aerospace. Angie, hi.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
We also have Jacob Geer from the United Kingdom Space Agency. He's the head of surveillance and tracking. Thanks for being here, Jacob.
Hey, thank you for having me, and hello everyone from London.
And also we've got Krystal Azelton from the Secure World Foundation, the Director of Space Applications Programs. Thanks for being here, Krystal.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to talk with you all today.
Right. So before we get started, I wanted to just do a little overview. So I'm going to start with you, Jacob. Most of our viewers are from the United States. So the UK Space Agency, can you just give a few words or sentences about its mission, who your customers are, what you guys are up to?
Sure thing. So we're a government agency in the UK. We're part of the business department, and we've got three goals or missions. Firstly, to catalyse investment into the UK space sector. Secondly, to deliver missions and capabilities across the space sector. And thirdly, to champion space for the public and internationally. And we've got a number of different aims set out in our national space strategy, announced by the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, just last year, one of which is to be a global leader in space sustainability, which is why it's so great to be talking to you all today.
Yes, very fitting, very fitting. And Krystal, as you know, we've had some other guests from Secure World Foundation on. We've had Senda Collins-Arsenal, one of the co-founders of Secure World. We've had Peter Martinez, the executive director, talking about operation in space. So can you just tell us a little bit about your role and what brought you there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a pleasure to work for Secure World, where our mission is to focus on space sustainability. And I sort of have two roles there. So the first is I'm the Director of Space Application Programs, as you mentioned. And what that means is that we talk to people about finding solutions for space sustainability. We also have to talk about why. What is the benefit of space? And making sure that we have policies in place that allows for the efficient and effective use of space technology, data, exploration, everything that goes into space activity. We want to make sure that the policies are in place that supports that benefit. So that's my primary job. And I'm also privileged to be conference chair for the Summit for Space Sustainability, which we are partnering with Jacob and his team on to host in London this year, June 22nd and 23rd.
Yeah, it's very exciting, very exciting. There's lots of people coming together for that summit in London. So Angie's going to be leading most of this discussion. But before we get into that, I just wanted to define the terms for people. So Jacob, space sustainability, what does that mean to you?
For me, it's all about the sustainable use of Earth's orbits, and then a bit wider, sustainable use of space in general, so lunar or even extraterrestrial objects as well. It's all about using the environment that is space, the pristine natural environment as it was around 50, 60 years ago, making sure that human endeavour there doesn't create ongoing issues. One thing it doesn't count for me is sustainability of the Earth. I tend to think of space sustainability starting at the Kármán line and not really covering things such as climate change or other fossil fuels.
So more about the operations environment for around the Earth, around the moon, and beyond. Yeah. So Krystal, I know that Secure World, their kind of mission is sustainability. They have a very distinct definition of it. So do you want to share that with us and maybe expound on it personally as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're very much in line with Jake's comments here that when we say space sustainability, we're typically referring to ensuring, usually through international cooperation or other policies, that the environment around Earth remains Sustainable. Well, what is, sustainable can mean a lot of things. So we think that means, is it peaceful? Is it secure? Is it usable in the long run? Because we're interested in this, not because we think space is cool. I mean, all of us in the space industry think that. But we really think that you have to do this, as I said in the beginning, for the benefit that we receive on Earth. And so we want to be able to continue to have those benefits, expand on those benefits, see governments do amazing research, see new industry partners, looking at all these exciting business cases. But in order to do that, we need to ensure that the environment remains sustainable in the long term. And so that's what our mission is. And that's what I'm really excited to contribute to. And I'd like, it's a changing field. 15, 20 years ago, we wouldn't have had a common definition of space sustainability, but now the activity is really ramped up in so many ways, and it's really exciting to everyone who's doing this is very much interested and committed. Like, we all understand that this is necessary, and so it's a very active field in the sense that we're trying to figure out what that actually means. What do we need to do to ensure that it's not like there's nobody out there who's going to say, oh yeah, space sustainability, we don't need to worry about that. Like, who cares? Like, that's not the case. And so that's also a really kind of fun part of this is we get to debate the how, not the why.
Right. And I'm sure that the more you know, the more you realize is involved in that, maintaining that sustainable environment for future generations. Yeah. And of course, international cooperation. I mean, space does cross those national borders today, unlike it used to, especially with the injection of private space. Okay, well, thank you. So, Angie, dive us in.
All right. Thanks, Colleen. So, everyone knows, everybody, at least in the space sector, knows that space is becoming more and more crowded. I mean, low Earth orbit is becoming very crowded with these very large constellations of satellites, the applications of which are good for people, but also it's starting to take up a lot of space in low Earth orbit and even in GEO. Right now, there's not one kind of unified approach to managing all of that. And it seems like each country is kind of taking a different approach. So can we talk about the differences between the approaches that are being taken in Europe and specifically in the UK and those approaches being taken by the United States? So whichever one of you guys want to go first.
I'll go UK to start with, and Krystal, you can fill in the US side of it too. So in the UK, we have the Space Industry Act. That's our national regulation, which talks and sets out a specific set of guidelines around safety, as you'd expect, security, but also sustainability. So we choose to use the UN long-term sustainability guidelines as our handrail for our national regulation, our national licensing for people to either launch satellites from the UK, and we'll be launching our first satellites in the summer from Cornwall in Scotland, or to operate a satellite from the UK as well. So it's baked into our national laws. However, it is an international problem, as you say. We don't want there to be that the UK companies are uncompetitive with us or have rules that others don't face. So a lot of our work goes on in multilateral forums, like the UN, so the Committee for Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, or there's an interagency debris committee as well, where lots of national agencies come together to talk about what we can do about space debris and space sustainability. But those seem to be quite slow in terms of how long it takes to set new rules. Mm-hmm. And so actually work that we've done here with a group of like-minded nations at the G7 last year, for example, we drafted and agreed a statement with our G7 partners highlighting the importance of space sustainability. Is a really good step just to get everyone talking on the same page about, as Krystal said, why it's important, but also next, how we're actually going to do something about this.
Krystal?
Yeah, absolutely.
Comments about the US side?
Well, I don't know that I would necessarily come at this just from the US side. So I would say that absolutely this is going to be a joint activity, right? It's going to involve a rules-based approach. It's going to involve an incentive-based approach. It's going to involve a voluntary-based approach. Like the way that we're going to be able to manage or coordinate, whichever your preferred terminology is, the future of space debris is really going to have to be a joint global effort, but that the actions are often driven by countries. I mean, that's who regulates launches. That's who regulates satellites companies. That's who provides their spectrum licenses. So it's going to have to be sort of based on a global understanding, but something that, individual countries who are promoting and supporting these industries are able to actually set up regimes within their country. And we've seen a lot of really great movement. Now, there's definitely some disagreement over terms, over the exact approach. And I do think there's some coordination there. But I will say that underlying all of those differences, we actually see a really common purpose. So I think the understanding of the problem and the evolving understanding as we gain better and better space situational awareness data is really coming to the forefront. And I haven't seen anyone who's taking a radically different approach. It's simply a matter of different countries and organizations, figuring out what their exact laws are going to be and then trying to coordinate those with others. So we definitely see a lot of movement in this area, and it's one of the most exciting areas of space sustainability right now, and obviously one of the more urgent as well.
Right. And of course, you mentioned space debris, and we cannot talk about sustainability without talking about space debris. Let's talk a little bit about what the exact problem is for those watching who may not be as familiar as we are. And then what are some of the technical solutions, maybe even some of the policy solutions that might be taken to help mitigate this situation?
Yeah, I'm thinking of like technical solutions like debris management. There are lots of new technologies that are actually being able to remove debris from orbits, from especially very crowded orbits like low Earth orbit. But there's also some phenomenal things like small satellites using hive technology to send out a net and go capture things, beyond just robotic arms. So those kind of technical solutions would be something interesting. But also, like Angie was saying, what policies are we missing? Krystal, go ahead.
Sure. So yeah, we're really excited by the development of new technologies, as active debris removal is one of the topics that we're going to be talking about at the summit. And they're specifically looking at priorities. I mean, if you had told me a while back that we were going to be this close to being able to do some of these things, I don't know that I would have believed you, but we've really seen the technology move ahead quite quickly, which is very exciting, but also means that we need to make some decisions. What are the priorities? What does that look like? Different governments are funding different projects because obviously space debris removal isn't something that, can be done on a completely, philanthropic or other kind of basis. It's going to be a coordination between private industry and government. And so thinking about what that looks like, what's the most, what are our biggest priorities? That's definitely one piece of it. Another piece of it is legacy debris. That's something that a lot of us, maybe don't want to talk about, but is something that we need to think about. There's a lot that's been up there for quite a while. And then moving forward, we're seeing, as everyone knows, I think most of your viewers will know, the launching of a lot of new satellite constellations. And these constellations are poised to provide really exciting benefits. But we also need to make sure that that's done in a managed and sustainable way. And so that's going to be a combination of policies. So again, how different governments regulate these companies, what they're required to do, but then also within the international framework. But we're also seeing a lot of voluntary opportunities here. So companies that are saying, this is how we're going to deorbit these kinds of satellites, or this is the kind of maneuverability that we're building into, or this is how we're working with debris removal companies to handle things. I mean, again, it's going to be a combination of policy and technical solutions that are going to keep us moving forward here. And to a certain extent, we don't have all the answers. I mean, some of this is quite concerning, and we are going to see potential problems, but we're also aware of those. And so I think there's a lot of work being done across governments and across industry to say, okay, well, where really, what does even orbital capacity look like? What is too much? It's easy to refer to the Kessler syndrome and say, okay, well, we know that answer, but we don't. Not from a practical case of actually knowing, okay, this is where we are for spectrum concerns. This is where we are from debris concerns. So I think there's a lot of work to even understand what's possible in terms of, especially for active orbiting constellations.
So on the technical side, we have had a number of different solutions trialed. So from the UK, there was a satellite launched by the University of Surrey a few years ago. They trialed nets, so capturing old debris with nets, harpoons, which perhaps sounds a bit dangerous to you guys, but it does work for capturing old satellites and some other systems as well. And then with through our European Space Agency commitments, which by the way is completely different from the European Union, so the UK is very much still a part of the European Space Agency. We're working with a Swiss-led team who have what they call tentacles to go out and envelop and capture a spacecraft and then bring it back down and safely deorbit it. But we're also working with companies like Astroscale, who operate their satellites from the UK, who are trying to attach magnetic docking plates onto satellites that now go up into space, so that they can very easily and quickly zoom a satellite up to them, attach the magnets, take it back down or out of harm's way, and then do so again and again and again. And it's that sort of behavior, that sort of baking in your sustainability into the design of your spacecraft, as well as going to capturing the stuff that's already up in space, that's really going to make a difference to this issue.
Well, thanks, Jacob. We all know that the commercial entities are asking, government regulators, et cetera, to stay flexible in how we come up with our regulations or consensus agreements or whatever. Jacob, could you talk a little bit about the benefits to a rules-based approach over perhaps an incentive-based or voluntary approach?
Sure. So we already have national regulation talking about sustainability. So each country can get behind this and insist on that. And that's good because it gives people a very clear aiming point to go for. It tells people what you have to do to get your license in the first place. It also is quite specific in terms of what you have to do, and it applies to anyone. The issue is different national regulators have different approaches here, right? So we have to somehow combine or make them coherent so that if I can't go and go to a different regulator, to do regulatory shopping, as we call it, to try and pick up the easiest regulation availability. So we need nations to come together to have the same regulation or rules-based approaches. Just one point, a personal opinion. One thing that I do see a little bit of more and more these days is the space version of greenwashing, if that's a term you guys use, where you sign up to a charter or some piece of paper which says we will be sustainable, but there isn't actually any action attached to that. One of the key things that a rules-based approach or regulation does is it insists upon action. You have a standard to make, and there are penalties or incentives for doing so. I think that is really important.
Well, thanks, Jacob. And Krystal, any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I push back a little.
Secure World is involved a lot, in this particular area. So, and I know that there's been talk of incentive-based, behavior, voluntary approach, things like that. What's your take on it?
Yeah, so our take is, a rules-based approach, regulation is absolutely necessary. This is a complex environment. Governments can and are, and they're responsible legally for a lot of this. I mean, there's no question that that's going to be a huge part of the solution. But our general take on this is that it's not about choosing one or the other or trying to say it's only about this. It's going to be about finding the right mix of voluntary approaches, incentives, shared principles, guidelines, and regulation is going to be the way forward. And we've seen that. The technology moves quickly. And as Jacob kind of alluded to before, sometimes the international community or even individual governments can't quite keep up. And so, that doesn't mean we wait around till they catch up. It means that industry will take the lead as well. But that has to be done within the framework of strong regulation as well. So to us, it hasn't always been a mixed approach, and that's consistent with other industries. Obviously, space has its uniqueness, but we really feel strongly that kind of everybody has to step up and figure out what's going to work as these new activities occur, and we build that into a system with important capabilities that already exist.
Yeah, I love that idea of the balanced approach. Yeah, I love that idea of the balanced approach. Just because I'm thinking of other industries where there weren't these kind of environmental protections, and how if you don't make the rules, then what is the incentive for actually keeping the environment clean? whether it's the space environment or environment on Earth. And the incentive is it profit driven, where you can actually create a business model to remove debris, and then balance that with rules in terms of launch or pre-launch protections?
I mean, I would jump in there and say that, I mean, that's actually one of the things I find most hopeful about space sustainability. I mean, we definitely have disagreements, and there's definitely going to be a lot to work out, and it's not perfect, and not everybody's a good actor. However, I will say that in general, there is an understanding that we cannot go down the road of other kind of more earth-based industries that completely ignored environmental and general, sustainability, small s, non-space sustainability concerns. So, I mean, while I do think there are a lot of challenges, and we shouldn't assume that everyone's just going to act in their best interest, at the same time, we do see commitment across government, across academia, across industry, that this is important. Now, what that means and what it looks like, sure, we're going to continue to debate and figure that out. But I think it's one of the most exciting things about space sustainability is, again, like I said in the beginning, you're not going to have anyone who comes out and says, oh yeah, no worries, I'm just going to launch my satellite and I don't care what anybody else does. Because there's an inherent and understandable danger there. And so I think that gives us a really good starting ground, like common ground for which to build this mixed regime of, various types of voluntary incentive and regulation.
Yeah, and talking about kind of rules-based, the U.S. has recently committed to not performing ASAT testing, so that kind of very debris-creating test. And I know Canada has just signed on recently again for something similar to that. So, is this something, do you think the ASAT ban statements by governments, and I'll start with Jacob, do you think these are meaningful? I mean, are we talking about complete prohibition? How is that going to be enforced? What do you think that might look like?
I think this is really meaningful, and the US taking the lead there, and obviously it's something that we've been talking about in different forms for a long time, is really welcome, because that US leadership internationally really shows people that it's an important thing to do. And if a big major power does it, it sort of sends a signal to the others. Russia might not be listening quite as much to that signal right now, but other nations might be. And so it is very welcome. And I think we'll see more and more nations talking about this in the future, I hope, as well. And for us in the UK, we recently drafted a UN resolution about responsible behaviours in space, which has gone through and passed in the UN General Assembly. That's all about establishing some rules and guidelines for what is acceptable for nations to do in space and what is unacceptable. And the US coming out and saying, we think it's unacceptable to be doing ASAT tests that create debris, is a really strong step in the right direction.
Krystal, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I mean, Secure World is incredibly active on this issue. And I would say that the recent US announcement, and as you mentioned, several other nations speaking up in just very recent days to support that or potentially make a similar commitment is probably one of the most exciting security-related developments in space in a really long time. It's definitely in the realm of space sustainability. Several years ago, Secure World identified a problem when we're talking about anti-satellite testing, and that was that a lot of the discussions around what does the future look like, what are the dangers, were really confined to the security sphere. So people with security clearances, or just that was what they did. And while that's useful, this is an issue that affects a really wide range of space actors. And so to just have those conversations in those communities was not helpful. And so we put out a report at the time where we said, okay, part of the reason people can't have conversations is they don't have open sources. What are the capabilities? What's the history? What are the capabilities? What's happening globally around the world? And then let's talk about what is responsible behavior here. And I think all of us can generally agree that one goal should be to not create, deliberate creation of debris is something that just doesn't make sense for the long-term usability of space. And so we're very heartened by this recent announcement by the United States, excited that it's happening. Do we think that, tomorrow we're going to wake up and there's going to be a brand new treaty on this? No, we have to work within the confines, but like similar areas within security, this is an incredible starting point for getting us to a place where the risks and threats of anti-satellite testing are reduced or completely eliminated.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Krystal and Jacob. We're going to switch gears just a little bit. There's a lot of activity now in terms of commercial LEO. In fact, NASA, as we know, has an office for commercial low Earth orbit development. Recently, 4 companies have announced plans to put space stations on orbit. We've all heard of the Orbital Reef. That's Blue Origin and Sierra Space. We've heard of the Star Lab. That's NanoRacks, Voyager, and Lockheed Martin. Of course, the Axiom 1 crew went up to the International Space Station, and in fact, Axiom plans to provide a couple of modules to the space station. And finally, Orbital Assembly is planning to launch something within the next couple of years, their Pioneer station. So we can see a transition from government being the primary user of low Earth orbit, and particularly for human exploration, to migrating over to these commercial space stations, which makes the sustainability problem even more important. So Krystal, what do you think the transition might look like, moving from primarily government activity over to a commercial, which would have to be a profitable activity in low Earth orbit specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of questions here, right? So you're exactly right. This is a fairly new development. It's a very exciting one. Secure World is sort of delving into, okay, how does this affect sustainability? So I can't say I have a lot of comments on the business plans. I'm excited to see a lot of really capable, talented investors and companies, and the people running these. They know this environment. They've been very successful in other places. So I'm quite hopeful that this is the start of, commercial and, non-governmental activity in low Earth orbit. For me, the primary question coming from Secure World is, well, what does that mean for space sustainability? What does that potentially mean for debris? I mean, I think most people know that there's been a lot of close approaches and even hits onto the space station from debris. So now if we have multiple stations in orbit, what does that look like? Does that change our considerations, that sort of thing? So we definitely want to look at that. We want to look at, changes to human safety regarding human space flight that's provided by a commercial actor. There's issues in terms of, we launch a lot of small satellites from the ISS. How does this new environment affect that? So I can't say I have a lot of good conclusions, but I have a lot of questions, which is why we also put this on the agenda for the summit, because we don't know that anyone has these answers, and they're not. It's not something that I'm saying, oh no, we have to stop. That's not what I mean, but just that. Okay, we have this new activity that we can see it coming. Now we need to say, okay, well, what are the sustainability guardrails we need to put in place so that this can be successful? Assuming they've got their profit model figured out, because that's not my job. What does it mean for the rest of us to understand, all of these other concerns?
That's right. And with more orbital activity, it even becomes more important when you have people on board. So I have a lot of questions too. I'm very excited about the developments, but again, I still have a lot of questions about it too. So we'll see how it goes.
Even from the governance perspective, exactly, Angie. We have a way of managing ISS. I think everyone understands that it was sort of created in the spirit of international cooperation. And obviously we've seen some strains on that recently. And so now that we're going to have commercial space stations, the ISS model is changing. We're going to see potentially other nations launch their own habitats. And so even just thinking through the governance and the policy questions at an international level, that's another huge question for me. What does that look like? What is, even just emergency evacuation of humans look like when you have more than one space station on orbit at the same time? And I don't think anyone's, fully worked through that yet.
So let me come in on that. I'm interested to see if the growth of new commercial space stations and more humans in space provoke discussion about the rules of the road. Who moves out the way, or who has to take action if there's going to be a collision? At the moment, NASA and the ISS and SpaceX, for example, have a really good agreement whereby SpaceX say, well, we will move our satellites, our Starlink satellites, if the ISS is at risk. Will that still apply to other satellite operators, other constellation operators? Will that apply to space stations that are commercially crewed, that are crewed by Chinese astronauts, for example? will that become a norm or a rule of the road, or will that fall by the wayside? That, I think, will come over time and is going to be really pushed by more humans entering space.
Excellent point. And let's extend beyond low Earth orbit. We haven't really spoken much to cislunar activity, but it seems that at some point we're going to have a lot of activity in the cislunar space, and particularly in the vicinity of the moon. And there's going to need to be a lot of things sorted out before people even start putting settlements on the moon when we get that far. So what are some of the questions, Jacob, that you think we might need to address when we're thinking about potentially developing resources on the moon, having permanent colonies on the moon, settlements? What questions come to your mind?
Firstly, I think about how we're going to make sure that the orbit of the moon is sustainable and safe again. So our ground-based space situational awareness sensors, right now based on the Earth, can't really see the moon's orbit very reliably. So does that mean we're going to have to put up some new sensors in space to look at the moon to make sure we don't have the same debris problem in the moon's orbit? That would be my first question. And then I think we're approaching governance questions around, really, if you get to the moon, for example, and you put your flag in the ground and you set out the fact that this is your area of operations, is that therefore a claim that's legally defendable? Is that something that is accepted as an international norm again, or is there going to be some challenge to that? And I do think that international norm around lunar exploration, which the US, again, has really led on with the Artemis Accords, which the UK is proud to be part of, is something we need to address before we get there. And the Artemis Accords is a great way of starting that conversation.
Great. Yeah, all good points. Krystal, do you see another race to the moon? Because we know the United States and partners are taking steps and trying to get to the moon. It was 2024, but we know that's not going to happen. And we also know that the Chinese have big plans for getting to the moon, and the Russians as well. Do you perceive this as kind of being another moon race, or just, how are we going to manage all of this when all these different countries with different governance philosophies start actually doing things on the moon?
Yeah, I think Angie knows as well. We generally don't call it a race. I think that's actually terminology that's sort of unhelpful when we're trying to think about what sustainability look like. So there's definitely going to be potential competition for preferred sites or for forming partnerships and alliances and lunar activities. But I don't think it's a competition to get there first. And I think that's kind of what hurt us the first time we went to the moon. Lunar activity needs to be sustainable. So it's not necessarily a matter of who's first, but what activities can we build towards a lasting presence that actually delivers, value. And so for me, what that means is the key questions are actually around coordination of activities, safety, and non-interference, coming to common approaches and principles that will help address these aspects, regardless of the types of activity. Whether it's research or mining or, human exploration, and looking at these collectively as topics that will address the needs, and how to balance multiple interests in the moon. And the good news is we don't have to start from scratch. We have existing principles in space law and governance, such as like the LTS that Jake mentioned earlier, can help inform lunar governance. And so just really looking at that and other domains, even environmental law can potentially be helpful here. So really thinking about interoperability, shared infrastructure as part of governance on the moon. I think that's where a lot of the exciting activities and potential for creating a sustainable lunar, I won't say economy, but lunar activity that won't just be a one-off for anyone.
Yeah, I agree that the fact that it was a race back in the 60s, it seemed like once the United States got there, it wasn't as important as it was before. And I agree with you that it's there is going to be some competition, but that's not what it's all about. It's exploring and doing research. in the lunar environment, not just on the moon itself, but in lunar orbit and potentially beyond. I think, Colleen, you had a question about that might be STEM related. We're going to take yet another crazy turn in this conversation. So go ahead, Colleen.
Let me just comment on that too, because it's interesting in terms. Have you heard the term co-opetition? This is something I've been hearing thrown around a little bit. So it's interesting though when you start introducing possibly mining resources from the moon, how that can change the equation to going beyond just exploration and scientific endeavors. So we are getting near the end time here, but I want to squeeze in at least two more questions, and this is the stuff that are near and dear to my heart. One of them is about the space sector, and of course, everyone thinks that you have to be a space technologist. You have to be science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But as we know, besides these kind of technical endeavors in space, there's also governance that we've just been talking about. There's the business side of it. The space sector needs, beyond technologists, they need economists, they need contract specialists, communication specialists, policymakers, cybersecurity, all these things. So what do you think the space sector could do better? And I'll start with you, Jacob. What do you think the space sector could do better to bring in a richer variety of people with the backgrounds that might be needed?
Yeah, this is a subject that's close to my heart. I was speaking to the UK student conference recently, and I said, look, we need engineers and scientists and physicists and all the sort of hard STEM subjects we need. We also need diplomats, economists, project managers, people managers to come into the space sector to really make it work. And some of the things we've talked about today, the need for international cooperation, setting rules and standards, diplomatic or multilateral intervention, just proves that really. We need people that can talk that language. So I think the thing we can do to really reach out is talk about space in these wider terms as an endeavor between nations that needs cooperation, that needs people to work together, and then think about where our STEM graduates come from. So think about their academic institutions, for example, but then widen that out. What about the role in the UK for apprentices or people that learn on the job? They're really solid technical skills are what we need. What about reaching out to new types of people, perhaps that are underrepresented in the sector, from women and girls to different ethnicities as well? I think that's something the UK tries to do, and the space agency that I work for example, pays for internships for people from a range of backgrounds to try and remove one of the barriers into the space sector, which is that you need a really formal education to come in there to try and get more people in from different backgrounds. I think that's what we have to do now to both find that range of skills that we need and find that range of people that really represent our society as a whole.
Yeah, and I can jump in here because I'm a living example of this. I loved space when I was a kid. I was like the little kid that went to space camp, like begged my parents and really was excited. And then when I hit about 15, 16, 17, I went a different direction because I knew that I didn't want to be a scientist. And I was just smart enough to realize that I probably wasn't going to get to be an astronaut. And so I studied international politics and governance. And I went and did that overseas for a number of years. And then after a while, I said, well, I still really love space. And I realized that I had these transferable skills. You know, I was a project manager and I understood government and intergovernmental relations. And so was able to transition back and was really lucky. But, you know, that was something that happened to me. And so how do we appeal and educate young professionals and young people that there are all these other possibilities? I mean, for me, that's one of the key questions. The second question, I think, is COVID. COVID concerns me a lot. At Secure World, we're really, we're worried that, you know, even those who are interested or potentially interested, you know, the ability to just show up at something and ask some questions or meet people, that's hard in a 2D world. Like you need that introduction in a 3D world or someone to help you out. So I think addressing both of those, and part of that is how we tell our story, how we do outreach, how we make this seem like an industry that isn't just rocket scientists. And I think we have to do a better job at public outreach in general so that young people who may be interested understand that we have all of these potential, roles and opportunities, and they don't just stumble back into it like I did. And regarding COVID, I think we really have to be conscientious as industry professionals, all of us on this call and in the wider industry, that we're providing opportunities for young professionals. Secure World really focuses on doing networking and doing scholarships. And as Jacob said, reaching out to a diverse group of people, because we really want to provide that, those opportunities. And I think we all have to commit to that. Because once they're interested, they need to stay interested, and they need to stay in they need to find those opportunities and see a career path that exists. And so I think it's about bringing in new young people, but then also supporting the young professionals that have entered the industry.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Krystal, just in terms of not just bringing them in, but keeping them in. And I wonder if the support for that would even be more important for bringing in people from diverse ethnic and gender background. So that kind of support all the way through their career. Yeah. And of course, this is a great segue into the fact that space has been getting kind of a bad rap lately. I know that we have the Space Force Netflix show produced since COVID, and that was kind of a farce on decision makers. Although I did watch it, and I liked it. But, and also just in terms of space, in pop culture, whether it's movies, all the movies seem to be disaster movies, and end of the earth and the end of the human race. There's no real entertaining ones, at least I can find. So if anyone in our audience has a suggestion, let me know. And then of course the whole idea of billionaires going to space and what that means to people on Earth who don't have enough. How can we maybe work to change the public perception, or what are you most worried about with that?
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. I think that's a really important question. And I do want to draw attention to this in the space industry. It's something that I've grown more and more concerned about in the last few years. There's a lot of aspects of this. And for me, it's the question of whether we're telling our story well. And, there's a variety of examples that might point to the fact that we're not, clickbaity headlines. If you actually read the news story about space tourism or new launch companies, the story is fine. But the headline makes it seem like it's this big drama instead of actually talking about what the benefits of space exploration are. If you look to social media, I'm very concerned that a lot of activists and others online, don't have a positive association between space activity and benefit. And, you think about that, we're talking about generating interest from, young people. That's where they're getting their news from. I have teenagers. And so when I see memes popping up on, with people who have hundreds of thousands of followers, and all they're talking about is rocket emissions and climate change, that's a problem. And I can say that has seeped into even our own events. I hosted 2 events on climate change last year. And at both events, we got multiple questions about the benefit, or sorry, not the benefit, I wish, about how rocket emissions contribute to climate change, which is, okay, it's a question, but there's an answer to that question right now. And it's certainly not a big problem at the rate where we are at the moment, especially compared to other industries. But not questions about what the benefit of space. Space technology and data is at the forefront of addressing climate change. It's the reason we even know that there's a problem. And so when that's not the natural association that exists in the public's mind, that is deeply concerning to me. A final example is for us Americans, sorry, Jake. During the Super Bowl, there were 2 different commercials that were they were anti-space. And yes, they're just commercials, and that's not really what was driving them. But again, that's not how we want to be portrayed in popular imagery. You mentioned a lot of movies, and it's a lot of drama. So for me, I think the onus is on us. The media is going to do what media is going to do, but we as an industry can understand that the automatic assumption that everyone thinks space is exciting, which a lot of people do, but still that assumption maybe isn't as accurate as it used to be. And that we as an industry need to take it on ourselves to tell our story better, to really draw the linkages between benefit. How many of us have had to explain to someone in our families that indeed their GPS works even when their phone doesn't, and here's why? People don't understand that comes from space and that that's available all the time. And that's the kind of benefit that is so integral to people's lives. and that we need to be better about. And then when it comes to launches and exploration and new technologies, it's the same thing. Are we able to help people understand the value of this and to make sure that that happens? And I will kind of conclude on the idea that if we don't do this, it could affect our space sustainability. So we've been spending this whole time talking about space sustainability policy and how important it is to make progress on that. And if we're not careful, if the public perception of space activity changes, then that means policymakers' perceptions of space activity is going to change. And that could be quite detrimental to future policy changes that we need to see. So, I really think this is something that we as an industry need to pay attention to.
Right. Especially policymakers that have to get reelected, right? So, Jacob, what about you?
I think that was a perfect answer. She's completely right with that public perception point that we have at the moment. When I was growing up, and I'm not super old, it was about going to the moon, right? Man getting to the moon and what a brave endeavor that was, and people working together. Now I wonder, people growing up, their perception of space is billionaires, mostly white males, racing to get to space, and space tourists going up there who are rich, which isn't really what the industry is doing. When I look around me, that's not who's working here and the things they're working on. So I do think we have to correct that narrative by talking about the benefits of space, as Krystal said, monitoring the climate change issues, deforestation, how your hometown is growing or being used, all these everyday uses of space that people don't realise they're using satellites multiple times a day. We have to get out there and talk to people. And one final point, just to disagree with you slightly, Angie, I do think the film Gravity was quite good in some ways for space, and certainly for space sustainability. People get the fact that space station around and it can hit the space station. It may put the way we can never do. So maybe that one had a little good point.
That movie was interesting. It's you can violate the laws of orbital mechanics on film all you want to, but I think it did bring to the attention that there is a problem, even though they did it in a slightly unrealistic way. But it was good to get that out there. And I agree with both of you. I think the perception is so important. Even my neighbors, I talk to them occasionally. Oh, I see another billionaire went into space. Is that what you guys are doing? And it's frustrating to me because I try really hard to explain to people the benefits of space and the real value of being there and using space assets to the benefit of humanity. But again, it's so hard to overcome the media's projection of what we're doing, when in fact those launches are just a tiny piece of what's going on in the space sector. So, Colleen?
Well, Angie, to jump in, sorry, just one quick comment. It's like, I don't ever want to seem like I'm also not excited about, the advances and the possibility of commercial human spaceflight. I think that is a huge frontier, but I think we need to situate that in the why it's important and the what it's doing. It's like in the race to make space accessible, we've made it seem exclusive. And that to me is the problem. Like, I don't think this is like, oh, those space companies are the problem. Not at all. It's that the way it's being portrayed lacks the other side of it. It lacks the context. And that's what I think we need to correct. We should absolutely be pursuing all of these exciting, opportunities for both, new capabilities in satellites, but also in exploration. I think that's important, even just from a tech transfer perspective. But if we don't do that by not making it just seem like, oh yeah, so-and-so went up to space, we really need to make sure that the messaging is around why. And for me, that's the issue.
No, I just wanted again to strongly agree. And what I tell people is think about the airline industry. I know this is the analogy that's used over and over and over again when talking about space tourism, but seriously, when commercial air industry started, it was only the really rich people who could fly. Okay, and now you can fly very inexpensively. I know from Las Vegas here, I can fly to many places round trip for very affordable ticket fares. So hopefully, when there's enough volume of business, perhaps the prices will come down a bit so that, ordinary real people can afford to take advantage of it.
Yeah. And I mean, one of my favorite value of space things is agriculture, in terms of how satellites help us increase yield and decrease the use of pesticides. So. Well, thank you guys, everybody, for being here. Angie, Jacob, Krystal, we've really enjoyed having you. Again, the Sustainability Summit is taking place in June, co-hosted by UK Space Agency and Secure World Foundation. For all those people who can't make it to London that week, it is available to attend virtually as well. So everyone, please check it out. And of course, you can always look for us on Twitter using the hashtag The Space Policy Show, as well as go to our website to listen or watch any of the episodes that we have in our series. Yes, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.